I stood there in the center of the boardroom, surrounded by people I'd worked with for 20 years, and listened to my stepson tell me I was obsolete. Not suggest, not imply, tell. "You don't understand the direction this company needs to go anymore, Richard," he said, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "And honestly, it's embarrassing watching you try." The room went silent. I felt my face go hot, not from anger, from something worse. Shame. The kind that comes when you realize you've been disrespected in a place where your name used to mean something. I looked around the table. Some people stared at their laptops. Others suddenly found their pens very interesting. No one said a word. My stepson, Derek, didn't even blink. He was 32 years old. I'd known him since he was 11. I'd put him through business school. I'd created a position for him in my company when he couldn't find work anywhere else. I'd taught him everything he knew about this industry. And now he was looking at me like I was a janitor who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. So I just nodded slowly, picked up my folder and walked out. I heard him laugh as the door closed behind me. Not loud, just enough for me to hear. I sat in my office for an hour before I could even process what had happened. Derek had been pushing boundaries for months, interrupting me in meetings, talking over me when I presented ideas, rolling his eyes when I gave direction. But this was different. This was public humiliation. And the worst part? I'd handed him the platform to do it. I thought back to the day I hired him. It was 3 years after I married his mother, Linda. He was 24, fresh out of grad school and completely adrift. He'd been rejected from 6 companies. His resume was fine, but his interviews were apparently disasters. He had no confidence, no direction. Linda had asked me, quietly, privately, if there was anything I could do. "I don't want to push," she'd said. "But he's struggling, Richard. And I think if he just had a chance to prove himself somewhere stable." I didn't hesitate. I created a junior analyst position for him. I didn't tell anyone he was family. I introduced him as a new hire and told my team to evaluate him fairly. I wanted him to earn his place. And for the first year, he did. He worked hard, showed up early, asked good questions. I was proud of him. Linda was relieved. It felt like I'd done something meaningful. Not just for her, but for him. But then something shifted. He started getting confident, which was good. But the confidence came with something else. Entitlement, impatience, a belief that he'd earned everything on his own. He stopped thanking me for opportunities. He stopped asking for advice. He started acting like I was in his way. I told myself it was just youth, ambition, he'd grow out of it. I was wrong. Not openly disrespectful. Just careful. Like they weren't sure where I stood anymore. Like Derek's outburst had quietly shifted the power dynamic and no one wanted to be on the wrong side of it. One of my senior directors, a man I'd known for 15 years, avoided eye contact with me in the hallway. That's when I realized how bad this was. Derek had humiliated me in front of the leadership team, and instead of anyone stepping in to defend me, they'd just let it happen. Because they weren't sure if I was still the one in charge. I went home that night and Linda could tell something was wrong. "Rough day?" she asked, pouring me a glass of wine. I almost told her. But then I stopped, because what would I say? Your son screamed at me in front of my entire team and made me look weak? Your son, the one I gave a career to, is actively trying to undermine me in my own company. I couldn't say it, not without sounding petty. Not without making her feel like she had to choose between us, so I just said, "Yeah, long week." She kissed me on the forehead and went back to the kitchen. And I sat there staring at my wine, wondering how I'd let it get this far. Just mourning Richard, like I was supposed to forget. I realized then that he didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He thought he'd won. He was having lunches with investors I'd introduced him to. He was positioning himself, subtly, strategically, as the future of the business. And he was doing it by framing me as the past. I overheard him once, talking to one of the board members in the hallway. Richard's great, Derek said, his voice smooth and confident. But he's from a different era, you know? The industry's changing. We need leadership that understands where things are going. The board member nodded thoughtfully. I stood there just out of sight and felt something cold settle in my chest. He wasn't just disrespecting me. He was trying to replace me. But every time I imagined it, I saw the same thing. Him looking at me with that same smug, dismissive expression. Him telling me I was overreacting. Him making me feel small all over again. So I didn't say anything. I just kept watching, but I could see the concern in her eyes. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to explain what her son was doing, but I couldn't. Because I knew what would happen. She'd defend him. She'd say I was being too hard on him. She'd say he was just trying to prove himself. And I'd look like the bitter stepfather who couldn't handle being challenged. So I stayed quiet. And the distance between all three of us kept growing. There was a time when Derek actually looked up to me. I remember the first time Linda brought him to my office. He was 14, awkward, quiet. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, looking around like he'd stepped into a museum. "This is where you work?" he'd asked. "Every day," I'd said. He'd walked around slowly, examining the framed photos on the walls, pictures of projects I'd completed, buildings I'd helped design, teams I'd led. "Did you really do all this?" he asked. "With a lot of help," I'd said. "But yeah, I was part of it." He'd looked at me differently after that. Like maybe I wasn't just some guy his mom was dating. Like maybe I was someone worth knowing. Over the years, that respect grew. He'd ask me questions about business, about leadership, about how to handle difficult conversations or navigate office politics. I loved those moments. I felt like I was giving him something his biological father never had. Guidance, stability, a model of what it meant to build something that mattered. When he graduated from business school, I was in the front row. Linda cried. I didn't, but I came close. Afterward, at the celebration dinner, Derek had pulled me aside. "I know I don't say this enough," he'd said, "but thank you. For everything. For being there. For believing in me." I'd put my hand on his shoulder. "You earned it," I'd said, and I'd meant it. That version of Derek, the one who was grateful, humble, hungry to learn, that's the version I thought I was hiring. But somewhere along the way, that person disappeared, and I didn't notice until it was too late. It was my corporate attorney, Jim. "Richard, do you have a minute?" he asked. "Sure. What's up?" "I got a strange call today from Derek." I sat up straighter. "He wanted to know about the company's ownership structure," Jim continued. "Specifically, he wanted to know what percentage of shares are held by non-family members and what the bylaws say about executive succession." My blood went cold. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd have to get back to him, but Richard, I thought you should know, because it sounded like he was exploring options." I thanked Jim and hung up. Then I sat there in the dark, staring at my desk, trying to process what I'd just heard. Derek wasn't just trying to undermine me. He was trying to figure out how to remove me. Every dismissive comment, every eye roll, every moment of disrespect. And I realized something. I'd been treating Derek like family, but he'd been treating me like an obstacle. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went for a long walk before work. I needed to think, to clear my head, to figure out what my next move should be. I walked through the park near my house, watching the sunrise, listening to the birds, trying to make sense of how we'd gotten here. I thought about all the times I'd defended Derek to other people. When the CFO had questioned his expense reports, I'd told her to give him the benefit of the doubt. When one of the senior managers had complained about Derek's attitude, I'd chalked it up to generational differences. When investors had quietly expressed concerns about his lack of experience, I'd assured them he was learning. I'd made excuses for him, over and over again. Because I wanted to believe in him. Because I wanted Linda to see that I cared about her son. Because I wanted to prove that I could be the father figure he needed. But Derek didn't want a father figure. He wanted a stepping stone. I need you to pull the full ownership documentation for the company, I said. And I need you to review the shareholder agreement, specifically the clauses around executive authority and board voting rights. Are you sure? Jim asked carefully. I'm sure. He sent everything over by noon. I spent the afternoon reading through documents I hadn't looked at in years, and that's when I found it. Buried in the shareholder agreement, the one I'd signed when I restructured the company 15 years ago, was a clause I'd completely forgotten about. As the majority shareholder and founder, I had unilateral authority to remove any executive or board member for any reason with immediate effect. No vote required, no appeal process, just my decision. I sat back in my chair and stared at the document. Derek had been researching how to push me out, but he'd missed the one thing that mattered most. I didn't need anyone's permission. Quiet calls, to investors, to board members, to people I trusted. I didn't tell them what I was planning. I just asked questions. How do you feel about the current leadership direction? Do you think the company's vision is aligned with where the industry is going? What's your read on Derek's performance? The answers were revealing. Most people liked Derek. They thought he was sharp, energetic, forward-thinking. But when I pressed deeper, cracks started to show. He's confident, maybe a little too confident. He talks a big game, but I'm not sure he's delivered on much yet. Honestly, Richard, I think he's still learning. He's got potential, but he's not ready to lead. One of the board members was more direct. Look, Richard, I like the kid, but between you and me, he doesn't have your instincts. He sees opportunities, but he doesn't see risks. That's dangerous in this industry. I thanked him and took notes, and I kept waiting. It was a small thing, petty even. But it wasn't about the parking spot. It was about the message. I belong here as much as you do. Maybe more. Then there was the company retreat. Every year, I gave a speech to the leadership team. It was tradition, a chance to reflect on the year, acknowledge challenges, and set the vision for what was coming next. This year, Derek asked if he could go first. I've got some ideas I want to share, he said. I think the team will really respond to them. I agreed. Big mistake. Because Derek didn't just share ideas. He gave the speech I was supposed to give. He talked about vision, about legacy, about the future of the company. And when he was done, people clapped. Loudly. When it was my turn, I felt like I was following an opening act. I kept my remarks short, professional. But inside, I was seething. Afterward, one of the younger managers came up to me. Derek really has a vision for this place, doesn't he? I smiled. He certainly talks like he does. The manager didn't catch the edge in my voice, but I heard it. Me too. Then I went back to my office and called Jim. What's the protocol if I want to exercise my removal authority? I asked. You draft a formal notice, present it to the individual, and notify the board. It's effective immediately. How much notice do I have to give? None. That's the point of the clause. It's designed for situations where immediate action is necessary. And if I do this, can it be undone? Not unless you reverse it yourself. Once you execute the removal, it's final. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there for a long time staring at the phone. This wasn't just a business decision. This was going to destroy my relationship with Linda. This was going to make me the villain in Derek's story. This was going to hurt. But I also knew that if I didn't do it, Derek would keep pushing. He'd keep disrespecting me. He'd keep building his coalition. And eventually he'd find a way to force me out. Or worse, I'd spend the rest of my career being undermined in my own company. I couldn't live like that. So I drafted the document. Derek was already there setting up his presentation. He looked up when I walked in. Oh, hey Richard. I didn't know you'd be here. It's my company, I said calmly. I'm always here. He looked uncomfortable for a second. Then he recovered. Right. Well, I was just going to walk the board through some ideas for restructuring the leadership team. You know, to position us better for growth. Restructuring the leadership team, I repeated. Yeah, I think it's time we made some changes. I nodded slowly. What kind of changes? He hesitated, like he hadn't expected me to ask. Just streamlining decision-making, empowering the next generation of leadership, making sure we're not held back by outdated thinking. There it was, outdated thinking. He was talking about me. I reached into my folder and pulled out the document I'd prepared. Before you present, I said, I need to share something with the board. Derek frowned. What is it? I didn't answer. I just waited. Effective immediately, Derek is no longer an executive of this company. He's been removed from his position, and his board advisory role has been terminated. The room went silent. Derek stared at me. What? I slid the formal notice across the table. This is within my authority as majority shareholder and founder. It's outlined in the shareholder agreement, which you're welcome to review with your attorney. His face went red. You can't do this. I already have. This is insane, he shouted, standing up. You're firing me because I challenged you? Because I had ideas? I stayed calm. I'm removing you because you've repeatedly disrespected me, undermined my leadership, and actively worked to position yourself as my replacement, without the experience, judgment, or loyalty required to lead this company. This is bullshit, he yelled. One of the board members cleared his throat. Richard, are you sure about this? I looked around the table. I've spent 30 years building this company. I've made sacrifices. I've taken risks. I've earned the right to decide who represents this organization, and Derek has shown me repeatedly that he's not that person. I turned back to Derek. You had every opportunity to succeed here. I gave you a career when no one else would. I mentored you. I defended you. I believed in you. And you repaid that by trying to erase me. That's not true. You scheduled a meeting to restructure leadership without telling me. You've been meeting with investors behind my back. You called my attorney asking about succession clauses. You parked in my spot every single day for 3 weeks just to make a point. His mouth opened, then closed. You didn't want to work with me, Derek. You wanted to replace me, and I'm not going to stand here and let that happen. I nodded to the security officer waiting by the door. You're done here. You'll receive your final paycheck and severance per your contract. Security will escort you out. His hands were shaking. My mom is going to hear about this. I'm sure she will, I said quietly. Derek looked around the room, waiting for someone to defend him. No one did. He grabbed his bag, shoved his laptop inside, and stormed out. The door slammed behind him. For what it's worth, she said, I think you made the right call. He was talented, but he wasn't ready and he wasn't respectful. I thanked her, but I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. He called me crying, Richard, crying. He said you humiliated him in front of everyone. He humiliated me first, I said quietly. 6 weeks ago, in front of my entire leadership team, and he never apologized. So this is revenge? No. This is accountability. She stood up, shaking her head. You're punishing him because he's confident, because he's ambitious, because he's not afraid to challenge you. I'm removing him because he's arrogant, disloyal, and completely unprepared to do the job he thought he deserved. You gave up on him. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I gave him everything, Linda. I gave him a career. I gave him opportunity. I gave him mentorship. And in return, he treated me like I was in his way. Her voice broke. He's my son. I know. And I'm your husband. But I'm also the founder of that company, and I will not be disrespected in my own boardroom by someone I handed a future to. She didn't respond. She just turned and walked upstairs. I stood there alone in the living room, listening to the sound of her footsteps fade. And I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. He moved out of his apartment and stayed with a friend. Linda visited him every few days. She'd come home quiet and distant, her eyes red from crying. I wanted to reach out, to explain, to make her understand. But I didn't know how. Because from her perspective, I'd chosen my pride over her son. And from my perspective, I'd chosen my dignity over being erased. There was no middle ground. One night, about 3 weeks after the firing, Linda finally confronted me. "Do you even care that you've destroyed our family?" she asked. I was sitting in my study, reviewing contracts. I looked up. "Of course I care." "Then why did you do it?" "Because Derek was trying to destroy me, and I couldn't let that happen." "He wasn't trying to destroy you, he was trying to grow, to prove himself. He was trying to replace me, Linda." He called my attorney. He scheduled board meetings without my knowledge. He spent months positioning himself as the future while framing me as the past. She crossed her arms. "Maybe because you wouldn't step aside." That hit hard. "Step aside?" I repeated. "You're 63, Richard. How much longer are you planning to run that company?" Derek was just trying to prepare for the inevitable. By disrespecting me. By humiliating me in front of people I've worked with for decades. "He's young. He made mistakes." "He made choices," I said. "And those choices had consequences." "You didn't have to fire him." "Yes, I did." She stared at me for a long moment. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," she said quietly. I nodded. "I understand." She walked out, and I sat there in the silence, wondering if I'd just sacrificed my marriage to save my company, but something had broken and I wasn't sure it could be fixed. It cost me any chance of having a real relationship with Derek, and some days I wonder if it was worth it. "Do you regret it?" I thought about that. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret protecting my company, but I regret that it came to that. I regret that Derek couldn't see what he was doing. I regret that Linda couldn't see what I was protecting. You think she'll ever understand?" "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you did the right thing. You can't let someone dismantle what you built just because they're family. That's not loyalty. That's surrender." I appreciated that, but it didn't make the nights any easier. Word is he made some strategic decisions that backfired. He's on thin ice. I didn't say anything. "You were right about him," Jim continued. "He wasn't ready." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat there staring out the window. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt sad. Because Derek could have been great. He had the intelligence, the drive, the potential. But he'd let arrogance destroy it, and I'd let him walk into my company, disrespect everything I'd built, and try to take it from me. Maybe we'd both failed. One evening, almost 2 years after the firing, she surprised me. "I've been thinking," she said. We were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. "About what?" I asked. "About Derek, about what happened." I stayed quiet. "I'm not saying you were right," she continued, "but I'm not saying you were completely wrong either." I looked at her. "Derek called me last week," she said. "He's struggling. He's been let go from 2 jobs now, and he finally admitted that maybe he wasn't as ready as he thought he was." "Did he say anything about me?" She hesitated. "He said he wishes things had gone differently. He didn't apologize, but he acknowledged that he pushed too hard." I nodded slowly. "Do you think you'll ever talk to him again?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. Someday. But not until he's ready to have an honest conversation. Not until he can admit what he did." She reached over and took my hand. "I miss us," she said quietly. "I do too." We sat there in silence, holding hands, watching the sun go down. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Sometimes we're even warm. But the easy trust we used to have is gone. And I've accepted that. I earned my place there, and no one, not even my stepson, was going to take that from me. And that's the difference between leadership and entitlement. And the boardroom is quiet again. Exactly the way it should be. But I know this. I didn't build a company for 30 years just to hand it over to someone who didn't respect what it took to create it. I didn't sacrifice my nights, my weekends, my peace of mind, just to be pushed aside by someone who thought ambition was a substitute for wisdom. And I didn't earn my place at that table just to be told I was embarrassing. Derek wanted to lead, but he never learned to follow first. He never learned to listen. He never learned that confidence without humility is just arrogance. And arrogance doesn't build anything, it just destroys. Self-respect is another. And the legacy you leave behind matters more than the relationships you sacrifice to protect it. Derek taught me that. Not intentionally. But he taught me. Because Derek made his choices and I made mine. And we both have to live with them.